people had not been heard for years for who they are. And the instant I was able to connect with them, their whole life shifted that very second, more so than any medication that's ever existed on the planet Earth. So what is the power of healing? It's extraordinary. And many of us get to experience when we get it. Let's put it this way, to pretend to be someone that we're not in order to protect the person that we are. And over time, we have learned how to say things that even we don't agree with. That's amazing that we're actually willing to say something that we, in fact, don't even agree with while we're saying it. So that's what humanity has really become. And in many cases, refusing to speak when we should because we're afraid we're going to be discharged or dismissed or disrupted or thrown off the island one way or another. So we don't speak our truest voice.
Today's masterclass is Welcome to Humanity. Our guest today is Dr. Fred Moss, a renowned mental health advocate, keynote speaker, psychiatrist with a passion for helping people find their authentic self. As the founder of the Welcome to Humanity movement and a True Voice mastermind, Dr. Fred's work is centered on the power of communication to heal and connect people. He is the author of Creative Aid and Healing Through Creativity and Self-Expression and Find Your True Voice, and has written numerous articles for Psychology Today. Dr. Fred's most recent work includes the True Voice course, which helps people rediscover their voice and share their message to the world, and Healing the Healer, a virtual course and mastermind designed to support transitioning healers. Welcome, Dr. Fred.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. Wonderful being a guest on your show. I really look forward to our conversation.
Thank you. It's my absolute pleasure. I'm really excited for the masterclass today.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So what took you on your journey to become a psychiatrist first? And secondly, how did Welcome to Humanity movement come about from that?
Okay. So yeah, let's look at that. I'd be glad to speak to that. You know, I was born to be a healer. I was born into a family that had two brothers, 14 and 10 years older than me. And they're still here and they're still 14 and 10 years older than me. And, you know, I was called on to be a communicator and to bring joy and connection to a home that was in chaos and disarray with my two brothers and their parents. And I don't really remember all that, but apparently I did a good job for a few years of doing exactly that. I became really enchanted with the whole idea of communication at that point. I remember sitting in my playpen and watching these adults speak and wishing I could be one, wishing that I too could communicate effectively. You know, over time, I began to really get fairly precocious. My brothers taught me many things. They taught me how to do mathematics. They taught me how to read. They taught me a little bit about the news and maybe a little bit about sex, drugs, and rock and roll when I was way too young to learn any of that. And when I, eventually started kindergarten, I expected school to be the place that I learned how to communicate. But I learned at that time that most kids didn't know what I knew. And most kids were just kind of picking their nose and throwing blocks and waiting for their nap and doing all those things. I too was picking my nose and throwing blocks and waiting for a nap, but I knew how to read and I knew how to actually do math and I wanted communication. But it wasn't going to happen in kindergarten. And I thought maybe the older school, the older grades. And as I started elementary school, I realized that it wasn't going to happen there either. The teachers were telling me to sit down and be quiet and listen and regurgitate what they said. And I wasn't really being called on to communicate. So I figured it must happen later in life, maybe junior high. And in junior high, the same thing happened, maybe even a little worse. And then in high school, again, even a little worse, like really being told to sit down and shut up and just listen. So this is not a rare experience. We all had this in going through a conventional educational system. I eventually went to college hoping that, of course, that would be the place where all the, the protests were, and that's where the people were speaking and the big kids. And I went to the University of Michigan and even there found out that the schooling was not the place that was calling on open discourse. I dropped out of college and I got on a bus and took a bus all the way to Berkeley, California so I could find myself. And I did find myself that summer, but it was not sustainable. And my family asked me to return to school so that I could learn a real trade. There was this new industry coming out in 1978, and it was supposed to be a booming industry for the future. The name of the industry was computers, and there was only one computer in all of Michigan, and that was at the University of Michigan. So I went back to be a computer person. I lasted for about 1 or 2 terms and then had to drop out again because I didn't want to do batch jobs and punch cards for the rest of my life. So off I went again, and I said I would never go back to school for any reason. My mom got me an application for a job at the state mental health facility for adolescent boys, and I began to work there. And that's where I learned how to communicate effectively, really. I learned that I could get paid to communicate, that I could heal people through listening and communication. And these people were just kids who were 6 or 7 years younger than me. And I was really enjoying the communication style that we had because it was so much fun to learn who these people really were and to have to share with them who I was. And in that, healing always occurred. The thing I didn't like about that job was psychiatry. Psychiatry was shifting. It was already becoming a medicating field. We'd call the psychiatrist on call, and they'd come down, maybe Timmy would be up too late or Jimmy and Johnny would be in a fight. They'd come down and interview them for like 7 seconds and then interview us for like 3 seconds and then go to the chart and write something. And we'd have to go retrieve the child and hold them down while we jammed him full of some injectable cocktail. Something that's still going on every single day in many hospitals around the world right this very minute. It has already happened hundreds of times today, even though it's still early in the morning. I didn't like that at all, and I saw that communication was the core value. And I wanted to go back to be psychiatry and to actually bring communication as the central feature of healing. So that's why I went back to school a third time. I finished my undergraduate degree and I went to medical school, did my residency and did my fellowship, and now I was a child and adolescent psychiatrist. Over the next several years, I built a massive practice in Cincinnati, Ohio. Eventually decided that actually being called on to diagnose people and medicate people because I was a psychiatrist. And I didn't like doing either of those things ever. So each prescription that I wrote, and I've written over 100,000 prescriptions, my heart aches. I have a little bit of a soul sacrifice. And in 2006, I finally had enough, and I started taking people off of medicine. Now, what was so interesting is that was seen as being very radical. And to me, that was the natural thing to do because what were we doing feeding these people these toxins out of laboratories? So when I began to take people off medicine, they got better, way better, reliably better, and in many cases lost their diagnosis altogether. And when that happened, I wanted to just scream it from the mountaintops. But violence isn't the best way to get our point across. So I had to really tone it down. And over the next several years, I really unmedicated many, many people, took them off their medicine, gave them their life back, and eventually decided that I would be a traveling doctor. And I went all over the country, United States, and I went also around the world, a little bit in many different cities, in Nepal and in Israel and in Paris and even in London. And did a little work on telepsychiatry, which wasn't a big deal yet. I could tell that it was going to be the future. I did a little work at telepsychiatry and really began to appreciate communication again. And at this point is where Welcome to Humanity eventually got its birth. The idea being that you didn't have to be on medication and you didn't have to have a diagnosis, that all of life's experiences are exquisite, whether they're painful or even intolerable or unspeakable or heinous or barbaric, or they're on the other side of being beautiful and ecstatic and wonderful and just plain yummy. When we had experiences like that, all of those things are gifts of what this lifetime brings, including the unmanageable or the miserable one. So Welcome to Humanity became a self-explanatory movement and really became my main brand. And from there is where I wrote my 2 books, which was Find Your True Voice, also the Creative 8, Healing Through Creativity and Self-Expression. And both of those are looking at different ways to manage mental health discomfort. The idea is we can be uncomfortable without being sick. And mental health and mental illness is ready for a redefinition. We don't even know what mentally healthy is. And yet we have the audacity to claim that we understand what mental illness is. How can that be true? We can't know what's wrong if we don't even know what right is. And there's a lot of different ways to look at this. But one thing is for sure, and that is that diagnosing someone with a mental illness has all sorts of implications, as does taking on a diagnosis. And the medications frequently don't work or even perpetuate, and in some cases cause the symptoms they're marketed to treat. So the treatment plan that we're using to affect people or to address people with mental health disturbances or imbalances is not the best one that's out there. There are many ways to put people back in balance without having anything to do with giving them a mental illness diagnosis or any kind of medications or frankly any kind of perpetual treatment whatsoever, because these treatments really are marketed to they often do perpetuate the symptoms they're marketed to treat.
Yeah, definitely, because you refer yourself as Dr. Fred Moss, the undoctor. Explain that a bit more.
Well, the undoctor is something that I took on, and what I started to realize shortly after 2006, it wasn't the medicine's fault. These medicines are just medicines after all. They're just they're inert substances. They're pills, they're liquids, they're injections, whatever they are. They don't make any decisions on their own. It's the humans that make decisions. And why do people take medicine? I was like, how do I get people to get that medicines is not the best route to help them rebalance their life? And what I learned over time is that the reason that people take medicine is that they think something is wrong with them. Why they want to be fixed or changed from who they are. They believe that when they're anxious or they're fearful or they're depressed or confused or scattered or angry or tired or hyperactive, that there's something wrong with them. And if looking at the real deal, you can see that if there was nothing wrong with you, you would have no incentive to actually take something to have there be something right with you. In other words, you wouldn't want to fix anything if there was nothing wrong with you. So the easy pathway into helping people relinquish themselves of the medication burden is to remind them that maybe they don't have a diagnosis or need fixing in the first place. We don't blame a log for burning in the fire. When there's a fire, a log burns. That's what happens. And a log isn't saying, I'm a bad log, I shouldn't be burning in the fire. There's lots of good reasons to be upset or depressed or scared or anxious or even scattered or even have difficulties in social settings. All the things that we are presently calling mental illness, there's lots of very good legitimate reasons, including what we take in our system, by the way. The toxins that we put into our system, medications, food, and drink alike, as well as what we take in with our eyes and our ears, can often cause imbalance. Who we hang out with can cause imbalance. And if we can be compassionate with ourselves, forgetting that all of this is just part of a greater scheme called life, then we get to the undoctor, which is really a moniker that a friend gave me because I undiagnose people, which therefore leads to unmedicating people and then undoctrinating people, getting people away from their doctors. Because actually, if I work myself out of a job, I've done my best work. If I can make it that my clients no longer need me and they're on their own feeling steady, then I, of course, have done very good service work.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. You have served the mental health industry for 4 decades. What improvements have you seen in your time?
Wow, that's really an interesting question. Improvements, I think the improvements, if any, are more recent than ever. The idea is that now with some of the new technologies that are being introduced into mental health, including the psychedelic technology, there's resurgence of looking at how psychedelics affect our mind and our thinking and our way of looking at life. So even from the psilocybin, to ketamine and even the less legal ones like LSD or MDMA or even ayahuasca, some of the hallucinogens have gone a very long way into helping people refocus and reconfigure their lives in a positive direction when under supervised care with a trained shaman or a trained healer. There's the new introduction of AI into the world of mental health. And I think that can be an improvement, although that's a very dangerous setting that we have now, because AI, we soon will be asking machines, we already are doing this, asking machines what a normal human is. And that, if that doesn't already sound completely absurd, it should. It's completely ludicrous and preposterous to ask a machine what is normal and what is not normal about being a human. So that's something to be very concerned about. The interface between artificial intelligence and the large language models and mental health is something that we got to put our finger on the pulse and really to embrace over time as humanity. Otherwise, we really risk being washed over by the machines, having humanity completely shift in a way that we really didn't foresee coming and maybe couldn't support if it was up to us.
As we all know too well, healing is paramount for our well-being. What are the effects of not healing and not understanding why we should heal?
Well, I think that most of us are pretty either comfortable or uncomfortable being as who we are. We've gotten this far being us, and we're not sure that we need any massive healing. And most of us do need healing. There's been traumas, and there's been wounding, and there's been a life full of toxins, and there's all sorts of healing that can take place. The problem is that in order to step into that, it takes some courage. You have to get rid of some of the ways you're looking at life now. Now, the best way to heal is to connect with another person. There is no better way to heal almost all conditions than to be in a human connection relationship. And so almost everybody likes doing that as well, whether they admit it or not. I mean, that's the whole point of podcasts after a while, is to have two people meet and other people to watch so that they can meet us meeting each other. And when we have human connection, that's at the heart of all healing. When people are disconnected, either from themselves or from others, is when sort of dis-ease, the undoing of ease takes place. And this is where we get what we then call symptomology, people acting out and doing things sideways as a way of filling voids or an attempt to fill voids that otherwise wouldn't exist in the human connection. So this is where addictions come in, or abnormal, or we should say adverse behavior, behaviors that are meant to fill a need rather than what could occur if one was feeling heard, if one was feeling properly self-expressed. There are multiple ways to self-express, including art and music and dancing, singing, drama, cooking, writing, gardening. And I actually amplify that and emphasize that in my first book, The Creative Eight. And along with sort of speaking and listening like you and I are doing today, some of these are more effective and more powerful than even the normal verbal way that we communicate together as humans. So when we're self-expressed and when we're heard, as well as when we allow others to self-express and listen to them, this is where human connection comes in. And as unified beings, we are social beings after all, we are tribal beings, we can see that that's where healing takes place. I have had several experiences in like the prison or in mental health systems where people had not been heard for years for who they are. And the instant I was able to connect with them, their whole life shifted that very second, more so than any medication that's ever existed on the planet Earth. So what is the power of healing? It's extraordinary. And many of us get to experience when we get involved in a useful, effective, comprehensive relationship with another person.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. And that really kind of leads on to my next question beautifully. Tell me more about True Voice, your book.
Right. So True Voice is a way of really it uses podcasting as a backdrop. And the idea being that we're often have been trained to actually speak ourselves, let's put it this way, to pretend to be someone that we're not in order to protect the person that we are. And over time, we have learned how to say things that even we don't agree with. That's amazing that we're actually willing to say something that we, in fact, don't even agree with while we're saying it. So that's what humanity has really become. And in many cases, refusing to speak when we should because we're afraid we're going to be discharged or dismissed or disrupted or thrown off the island one way or another. So we don't speak our truest voice. This book takes a look at the intention of speaking a greater sense of your inner authority, your core values, your authenticity. And we do it step by step, incrementally, taking strides to, you don't have to redesign what you're really about. It's in there all the way down underneath the muck and underneath the mud and underneath the rust and the cobwebs. So once we take away the cobwebs and the rust and the muck and the mud, we start realizing all we have to do is rediscover what's been there the whole time. And if we take natural small steps towards saying what we really mean, rather than pretending to be someone that we're not, we make these massive steps towards finding our true voice and delivering it effectively. And it goes into a world where people are naturally eager to actually hear what it is that we have to say. Find Your True Voice is a method that I use looking at hosting and guesting and listening as ways to establish connection with other people via the platform of podcasting effectively, because this is one of the best places in the world to actually have open conversations that are uncensored and uncanceled and available for tens of thousands, if not more, people to listen to and to be part of.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Can you explain approach that can help the listeners deal with feelings such as anxiety, guilt, shame, and anger?
So here's the thing: anxiety, guilt, shame, and anger are human experiences that are part of the potpourri of what it is to be a beautiful human being. So the first thing to bring forth when you're experiencing those things is there might be nothing wrong with you at all. It is okay to be highly uncomfortable. Being highly uncomfortable does not mean there's something wrong with you. This is the thing I really want to underline. It's very important to understand that, because once you can be compassionate and accepting and forgiving and kind and generous and available and patient and loving with yourself. When you're experiencing these experiences, the opportunity arises, although it's not always simple, to disconnect yourself from those uncomfortable feelings and don't become the actual feeling. The feelings are coming through, the feelings, the thoughts, the emotions, the physical sensations. They're going to happen. You're going to have things that are both comfortable and uncomfortable. And the saying, "these too shall pass," seems to fit right here as well. When you have these experiences, there might be nothing wrong with you, and there's almost available opportunity, an invitation to embrace the experiences, lean into the experiences, appreciate the anxiety for what it is, the depression for what it is, even the shame and the guilt. There's nothing wrong with you for having these experiences. It's your body responding to your body and your mind and your spirit responding to what it is that you're experiencing in life, internally and external, and allowing you to make the difference or the changes that you need to make in order to right your course, in order to rebalance your dysfunction.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautifully put. Thank you. What are some skills the listeners can do today to start beginning to realize their emotions and use them as tools? Because sometimes using them as tools is, people don't think about that. They're always trying to avoid using them.
Right. So I think that the first tool to think about using, or the first exercise that people can get, is really getting that there might be nothing wrong with you. It's really important to understand that just feeling uncomfortable does not mean there's something wrong with you and need to rush to a doctor to get a diagnosis. Being uncomfortable is part of being a normal human being. You know, Buddha sat under that tree for a long time, and he got rid of a lot of things. You know, he confronted and resolved many, many different human traits. One of the traits that he was unable to resolve was the fact that life is packed with misery. Even as he got up from the tree, that still was there. And that's because that doesn't go away in our life. And that was a long time ago. And that's been happening every day to every human being since and before Buddha. So we start looking at, it's okay to feel miserable. It really is. Now, I'm not wishing that on anybody. Misery is not a fun or a pleasant experience. It's just part of what living is. When we give ourselves that level of compassion and a willingness to experience life for what it is, experience the lemons and the, garlic and the, the things that maybe are otherwise distasteful in big doses, it's okay to see that this is a welcome to humanity situation. And the best response that's available is to be able to back off a little bit and get to welcome to humanity, to start realizing that it's really okay to be uncomfortable, even when it feels so lousy and we want to run away from it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Tell me more about your book, The Creative 8, Healing Through Creativity and Self-Expression.
Yeah. So the book was written as a way of managing this discomfort. It goes on the premise that communication is at the heart of all healing, that self-expression is at the source of communication, and that the other half of that is in the world of listening. So when we are open to self-express and do so in other ways, even beyond words, we can activate an understanding, a capacity to be heard, to be seen, to be recognized, to be gotten in ways that otherwise might have been unavailable, and lead to healing. What I learned over time, and it's no surprise to most people, is that when you're involved in art or music or dancing or singing or drama, cooking, writing, gardening, and then a few others, cleaning, photography, even poetry. While you're doing those things, any kind of negative feelings tends to disappear right during that time.
Mm-hmm.
So when what the book asks us to do is take 3 minutes a day and do 1 minute each of 3 different forms of self-expression that are outside of the conventional realm. So maybe doodle for a minute, or sing in the shower for a minute, or dance in your room alone or with your partner, for a minute. And that activates these pathways towards self-expression that leaves us open to the possibility of a day filled with the expressive capacity that we didn't have otherwise. When we're able to communicate ourselves, this opens up the possibility for other people to communicate with us as well.
Mm-hmm.
So the Creative 8 looks at these mechanisms of opening up new non-conventional pathways, such as the ones I've listed, as ways of expressing ourselves effectively in a world that is, again, very interested in having us express ourselves effectively. Because when we do so, we open up the path for whoever we're with to express themselves effectively as well.
Yeah, definitely. You have given us many tools, daily steps and tips. What is your most important takeaway?
Well, I'd say, again, my most important takeaway is like I've said a couple times, but I think I'd say it again, is there might be nothing wrong with you. And that mental illness is simply a conversation. In other words, this is an important piece as well. If you have a broken arm and you go to Tibet, you still have a broken arm. If you go to Singapore, you still have a broken arm. You go to Paris or London, you still have a broken arm. If you go to Calgary or Sacramento, you still have a broken arm. If you have a mental illness and you go to another part of the world, you might not have that mental illness anymore. There might be a new definition of what that looks like. You might even be promoted. You might even be moved to shaman. You might be given special gifts. You might be seen as having some super skills, some superpowers. That means that mental illness doesn't have a firm definition. And if mental illness doesn't have a firm definition that's universal, it is obviously a vague and nebulous concept that is subject to massive transformation from a narrative standpoint. I invite us all to look at a new definition of what it means to be a normal human being, and what it means, therefore, to even consider the notion that abnormality exists. Or are we all just going through life with the same handicaps and the same goals, as putting one foot in front of the other and finding our way through this challenging, extraordinary thing we call life? When we start really looking at all of that, we become a unified group of 7.8 billion people, all walking through life with similar confusion, even though some people look like they have it together. They don't have it together any more than anyone else, ultimately.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Thanks for the reassurance there.
Yeah, exactly.
Where can the listeners find you online, your books? What's your website, Dr. Fred?
Oh, it's been a pleasure to be on your masterclass here. I hope that I've opened up some ideas for some of your clients. I'm available for discovery calls for the listeners, so I can be reached, and you can learn a little bit more about things that I've been up to at drfred360.com, or by visiting my main website, welcometohumanity.net. That Dr. Fred 360 is drfred360.com. And you can get some freebies there. You can get downloads of my books on PDF. You can get some access to other things that I've written or other podcasts that I've been on, including my own podcast. I have the Welcome to Humanity podcast, as well as the Healthy Healer podcast. I'd love to speak to some of your listeners to see if there's anything I can do to help them move along in their journey through life. And if it's not me that you're going to work with, I have a pretty good handle of a lot of referrals in my back pocket, and can normally find somebody who could be of important assistance in helping you take those steps forward.
Thank you.
So there's another course that I teach. It's called True Voice Course, and you can find that at truevoicecourse.com. And it's a comprehensive course that really looks at all sorts of ways of taking steps to finding our true voice. It's a 6-module, 18-lesson, 54 prompts. There's a whole big workbook there, masterclass that comes with it. I'm very proud of that course. And that's called the True Voice Course at truevoicecourse.com. And the other thing is, feel free to order my books. You can find my book, the hard copy, and I can send you a hard copy for free at findyourtruevoicebook.com. I am available on social media as well, like everyone else. I have an account on Facebook and on LinkedIn that I reach out to pretty much daily. And I go through spurts of posting and not posting, eager to make any kind of contact, because without connection, no healing can take place. And with connection, we can end all wars, frankly.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for sharing your deep, insightful wisdom and knowledge with us today, Dr. Fred Moss.
Thank you.
What is one of the most courageous things you have done?
I think the most courageous thing that I have done, physically, the most courageous thing I ever did was walk in the Annapurna Mountains underneath Mount Everest. I did a hike through there. That was ridiculously courageous. I'm not sure I would even do that again. And I also had open heart surgery this year. They went in right through the center of my chest. I had an emergency open heart surgery. And ultimately, I think there's some massive courage in coming out of that and healing as well as I have.
Definitely. My final question to you is, what is your definition of courage? Because we are all about Create the Courage to be Fearless podcast here. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. I think that courage takes into consideration the fear that attempts to prevent us from taking the steps in areas of life that we would want to if we weren't afraid. So courage is taking the fear and moving forward anyway, actually stepping forth into what it is that we desire or what it is we choose to do, taking into consideration and incorporating the fear into our actions.